David Cassidy was viewed by the world as the ideal celebrity. Millions of people thought he had everything because of his effortless charm, voice, and grin. But there was a man who was running out of time behind the posters and the yelling masses. Every year, the wait increased, the lights dimmed, and the stages became smaller. Every song and every encore carried a reality he had kept to himself for decades. But his followers were unaware of this. Only when it was nearly too late will the truth be revealed. Television was more than just background noise in the early 1970s. It was the primary event of the evening. After supper, families gathered in front of the set and flipped through the limited number of channels accessible. And in September 1970, a new series filled American living rooms with color, melody, and a new kind of appeal. The Partridges appeared to be harmless amusement, songs that appeared destined to be heard on the radio. A dilapidated school bus painted with a vibrant rainbow, a widowed mother, and her 5 children. David Cassidy was at the heart of it all. He portrayed the self-assured eldest son, Keith Partridge, who had shaggy hair, a guitar draped over his shoulder, and a voice that could instantly win over teens. It was an instant connection. David was a star in every way within weeks of the premiere. His picture started to show up on magazine covers all throughout the nation. Life, Rolling Stone, 16 Magazine, Tiger Beat, and occasionally more than once. In a single month, teens waited in line outside the studio gates in hopes of catching a glimpse of him as he arrived for the shoot. Letters from all around the world flooded the show's production office with fan mail, which came in by the truckload. Television, however, was just the start. In the fall of 1970, the show's debut single, I Think I Love You, went viral, reaching the top of the Billboard Hot 100 and remaining there for 3 weeks. That year, it sold more copies than the Beatles' Let It Be, an incredible accomplishment for a song performed by a comedy performer. David Cassidy was suddenly more than simply a TV personality. He was a legitimate pop star. Almost quickly, concert tours were planned, and the spectacles they created were immortalized in popular culture. 50,000 people packed into a stadium in Melbourne, Australia, to watch him play. Several fans fainted as police battled to keep the crowd under control, and the cries from the crowd were so loud that David could hardly hear his own band. Such incidents were both exciting and enlightening. The danger was as real as the devotion. He appeared to be unstoppable from the outside. It was the ideal combination of the music, the hair, and the smile. Even still, David was starting to see the limitations of the part that had brought him fame. Despite the brilliant stage lights and carefully planned interviews, despite just being in his early 20s, he was already constrained by a well-curated image that producers and managers had created for him. The young man with his own musical aspirations, David Cassidy, was not wanted by the industry. It wanted Keith Partridge, the safe, marketable guy who could simultaneously sell television ratings, lunchboxes, CDs, and posters. David didn't take it lightly since he recognized the connection his supporters had with him. Knowing that this was more than just a spectacle to many in the crowd, he immersed himself into every performance. Seeing the artist whose songs had been the background music of their adolescence was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The only thing that was unrelenting was the pace. There was no privacy. It was impossible for him to go down the street without making a scene. Simple activities like going to the beach or getting coffee at a cafe were impossible without drawing large crowds. Under stress, friends slipped away. Relationships fell apart. The machine was still in operation by the middle of the 1970s. The records were sold. Huge crowds attended the tours. The magazine covers continued to publish. However, David sensed that things were starting to change. Notoriety lasted, and he was aware that it could disappear overnight, the instant he ceased being the version of himself that the audience desired. He never forgot that concept. He was reminded that everything he owned could be snatched away in an instant, as it grew silently in the background, a shadow at the edge of the brightness. Unbeknownst to him at the time, that shadow marked the start of a new chapter in his life, one that would lead him into battles no crowd could help him win, far from the yelling stadiums of his youth. David Cassidy found himself in a difficult situation in 1974, when the Partridge family came to an end. As Keith Partridge, he might have coasted for the rest of his life, performing the same set list for decades, grinning for the same nostalgic crowds, and maintaining the same secure image. His generation's stars followed that route and never turned back. David, however, desired more. He wanted more than to be known as a teenage idol. His goal was to establish oneself as a serious performer and musician. He started by distancing himself from the bubblegum pop sound that had characterized his career on television. He started recording solo albums in a more sophisticated manner, collaborating with seasoned musicians and songwriters who valued his abilities beyond his on-screen persona. This change had an almost instantaneous positive impact in the UK. Songs like How Can I Be Sure and Daydreamer rose to the top of the charts. Additionally, there were no longer any yelling teens among the fans that came to see him. They were ardent fans of music who admired his talent and voice. In America, however, things were different. The Partridge Family cast a long and enduring shadow. Interviews always returned to Keith Partridge, regardless of what he released. His appearance was often praised before his music in reviews. The public found it difficult to accept him as anything other than the clean-cut darling of the early 1970s. Even while he was playing to packed houses overseas, the thought of Keith followed him back home. The shift in tempo presented its own difficulties offstage. A slower, gentler beat that frequently felt lonely had replaced the chaos of his early 20s. There were extended periods of time when the phone didn't ring, because of the absence of the steady tour schedule and television filming. Some friends lost touch with David because they couldn't relate to him outside of the spotlight. Distance, the demands of a work that could change at any time, and the constant strain to maintain a character that wasn't wholly his own put relationships to the test. Nevertheless, David continued to move forward. Musical theater provided him with a fresh creative outlet where he could assume parts unrelated to his past. He was able to develop as a performer and regain some of the creative freedom that had been denied to him during the height of his fame. Thanks to productions like Blood Brothers and Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, he could break free from the label that had long defined him by playing a character on stage. But momentum is the foundation of the entertainment business, and David's was waning. New faces dominated magazine covers, new stars dominated the charts, and music trends shifted away from the style that had made him famous in the mid to late 1980s. There were fewer offers. Although he was still very much remembered, the relentless demand that had formerly accompanied him everywhere vanished as the crowds shrank. He was not prepared for it to be the end. Nevertheless, he was unable to ignore this unsaid reality. A new era had begun in his career, one that needed more effort to continue. The tidal flood of fame was no longer enough to sustain him. Every performance and every project was a climb. David was accustomed to working hard and was prepared to put up a battle for his position. Only the conflicts that lay ahead would not take place in the recording studio or on stage. Unlike a negative review or a decline in ticket sales, they would be individualized, erratic, and much more challenging to overcome. Those conflicts were already imminent, and everything will be different when they got there. From the outside, David Cassidy's career appeared to be in a stable rhythm by the 1990s. He was performing on stage, going on frequent tours, and occasionally appearing on television. That level of consistency would have sufficed for a lot of performers. The ground, however, was moving beneath the surface, in ways that would eventually rock the basis of his life. His finances began to show the first signs of weakness. He had lost the millions of dollars he had made in the 1970s. What originally appeared to be an unshakable fortune has been eroded by years of costly tours, court cases, and the financial burden of numerous divorces. During his prime, David, like many young celebrities of his generation, had not always had complete control over his income, and some of the arrangements he had negotiated had left him with far less than the public had anticipated. By 2015, it was impossible to conceal the truth. When David declared bankruptcy, it was discovered that his debts greatly exceeded his assets. It was a humble moment for a man who had once been among the world's top-paid celebrities. His personal life was the site of the second fracture. David had always been honest about his love of alcohol. However, alcohol evolved into more than just a light enjoyment. Before the general public saw the shift, friends and relatives did. Then he was arrested for the first time for driving under the influence in 2010. Another one followed in 2013 and 2014 as well. Every occurrence made news, not because of his music but because of his difficulties. The reality of a man struggling with addiction in front of the media was suddenly clashing with the public image of the smiling teen hero. A deeper emotional strain was added to these legal issues. Before his father died in a house fire in 1976, David had gone through a lot of sorrow, and the scar was never completely healed. Later in life, he also saw his mother, Evelyn Ward, battle dementia, a condition that gradually wiped out her individuality and memory. He was impacted by witnessing that decline, and that impact would come back to haunt him in the most intimate way. By the middle of the 2010s, David started to have concerning symptoms. He sung the song thousands of times, but he couldn't remember the lyrics. When he was performing, he lost his spot. These mistakes were initially dismissed as weariness brought on by years of travel. But David revealed the truth in 2017. He had been diagnosed with dementia, the same disease that had plagued his family history and claimed his mother's mind. The news was heartbreaking to his fans. The soundtrack to their youth, the guy who had once appeared impenetrable, was now confronted with a reality that would rob him of the same memories that had shaped his life and career. David, however, refused to completely back down despite that diagnosis. He kept on performing in smaller spaces, receiving more personal but no less sincere acclaim. He saw the stage as more than just a workspace. For however long he could, it was a place to cling to himself. It was only getting more difficult to ignore the signals of decay. His voice faltered in ways that fans had never heard before. Occasionally, his timing was off. He was starting to lose more to the illness than he could return. The man who had once appeared to be bigger than life was running out of time beneath the lights, and the harsh reality was beginning to sink in. Career highs and comebacks would not be the subject of the following chapter. It would be about accepting death and the ensuing painful farewells. The atmosphere surrounding David Cassidy's performances had evolved by the time he entered his last years performing. The environment had changed, but the fans remained loyal, many of whom had followed him for decades. Theaters had replaced the stadiums, and the wild cries were met with hearty cheers. These performances were more than just amusement for the crowd. They offered an opportunity to re-establish a connection with a portion of their own past. They served as David's means of clinging to the one location that had always felt like home. Flashes of the performer he had been at his best were still present. His smile lit up a room when the music began. Even after years of touring, his voice retained the warmth that had once made him a household name. But it was getting harder to maintain those times. On some evenings, he would sing a song hundreds of times and forget the opening. His expression tightened as he tried to get back into the swing of the show after occasionally losing his spot mid-set. Although most fans were aware, they kept quiet, preferring to concentrate on the happiness of seeing him rather than the difficulties that were getting harder to ignore. These slip-ups were initially dismissed as fatigue, the inevitable result of decades in the spotlight. But David made a public statement in February 2017 that completely stunned people. He disclosed that dementia, the same illness that had afflicted his mother and grandfather, had been diagnosed in him. The news was personal to many who had followed his career from the start. It was more than just a disease. It was about witnessing a colorful, iconic character face an obstacle that would rob him of the memories that shaped who he was. David wasn't prepared to stop, even after coming to that realization. Instead of fading away in silence, he chose to confront the mental and physical obstacles and kept on performing. The stage was more than just a career to him. It served as a lifeline, a means of re-establishing a connection with the once unstoppable version of himself. Nevertheless, every month, the disease's symptoms became more apparent. He slowed his pace. He occasionally stumbled when speaking. It was the weight of what he was fighting, not a lack of determination, that was causing the sparkle that had once made him magnetic to fade. His health was declining more quickly behind the scenes than the general public was aware of. His liver and kidneys had been permanently damaged by years of alcohol abuse. The number of hospital trips increased, and the intervals between performances lengthened. His closest friends and family were aware that the moment for saying farewell was approaching sooner than anyone cared to acknowledge. David was the only one who appeared committed to resisting it for as long as possible. There was a new type of feeling in his last appearances. There was softer applause. Tears frequently welled up in the crowd's eyes. Additionally, the audience-performer relationship felt more like a mutual farewell. He signed autographs. He posed for pictures. He related tales from his professional life. It has nothing to do with chasing a chart position or promoting a new album. It was about leaving a legacy for those who had supported him so generously. David's final months were filled with both thankfulness and certain fate. He knew it was almost over. Those closest to him felt the full impact of his struggles, even though the general public would only hear bits and pieces of them. His decades-long relationship with his admirers remained intact, even though his time in the spotlight was coming to an end. The man on stage would no longer be the focus of the following chapter. It would focus on his legacy and the aspects of his life that his admirers would only learn about after he passed away. The announcement of David Cassidy's death on November 21, 2017, sparked a global outpouring of sorrow and nostalgia. He was referred to as a music sensation, a television hunk, and a teenage idol in headlines. Morning broadcasts used old Partridge Family video, His greatest hits were played on radio stations, saturating the airways with tunes that had soundtracked many young bedrooms during the 1970s. As though the years between then and today had vanished in an instant, many fans felt as though they were losing a piece of their own childhood. Friends, co-stars, and other entertainers showered the public with tributes. His stepmother and on-screen mother, Shirley Jones, talked on his charm, his indisputable talent, and the happiness he had given to viewers. Former musicians and cast members recalled David's commitment to his profession and the hectic early 1970s. However, a more subdued farewell was occurring behind the public memorials, one that exposed the man who was hidden from view. David's closest friends and family were by his side in his last days. He was accompanied by his daughter Katie and son Beau, as well as close friends who had shared in his career's highs and lows. Those hospital moments had little to do with chart placements or celebrity. Holding hands, exchanging memories, and speaking up about things that had been kept silent for too long were all part of their connection. While some stories made me chuckle, others made me cry. Nonetheless, the tone was frequently one of appreciation. Despite all the obstacles, David was aware that he had been given a unique type of life. Many admirers were unaware of how much he had subtly donated in his later years. Because of his mother's sickness and his own diagnosis, David sponsored charities that focused on dementia and Alzheimer's research, even though he rarely made it public. The extent to which these efforts were important to him was only apparent to individuals in his inner circle. His legacy will always be associated with the enchantment of the 1970s. For the millions of people who only ever saw him on stage or television, they will recall the broad smile, the vivid stage outfits, and the voice that sung straight into their ears via a record player or television. But his narrative is also about perseverance for those who closely watched his career. He overcame the harsh changes in the entertainment business, battled addiction in public, and experienced both financial and personal adversity. Yet he managed to continue performing until his body would no longer support it. His tunes are still being heard by new people today. The song "I Think I Love You" is still readily identifiable, a relic of a time when television and music merged to create an illusion of grandeur for celebrities like David. His other work, including his solo songs, stage appearances, and deep cuts that are only known to his most loyal followers, still has the mark of a performer who always gave it his all. He never suppressed that aspect of himself, after all. The life of David Cassidy wasn't a picture-perfect tale of success, wealth, and contentment. It was a lot more human, dirtier, and more intricate. Perhaps this is the reason his narrative is still relevant today. He was more than simply the voice on the radio or the poster on the wall. He left behind a legacy that will never go away, since he was a man who experienced both the greatest highs and the lowest lows. For the admirers who grew up with him, David Cassidy's legacy lives on in their own narratives. The music continues to play, and the smile endures. That is the main reason his name is still important. Snapshots are frequently used to recall David Cassidy's story: the teenage hottie wearing a vibrant shirt, songs at the top of the charts, the radiant grin beneath the stage lights. Though they are simply a portion of the truth, such moments are real. Behind them was a man battling his own issues, while putting forth his best public self, as he navigated the constant tug of fame. He understood the quiet pain of performing in smaller venues, as well as the excitement of having 50,000 fans yelling his name. He struggled with addiction, illness, and financial loss as the years went by. Nevertheless, he kept returning to the stage, since it was where he felt most like himself. He will always be associated with Keith Partridge. However, David Cassidy was more than just a character. Being adored by millions of people had its benefits and drawbacks, and he was a performer who recognized the importance of connection. Furthermore, the crowd size didn't matter in the end. Long after the curtain was drawn, the bond remained strong. See here for more heartfelt tales.